am here to talk to you about DevOps. So as a very, very quick, I want to kind of get a temperature in the room. Who here has heard the word DevOps before? Awesome. Who here heard it before today? Awesome. Fantastic. So I'm here to help kind of maybe explain how you could build a healthy DevOps culture. Culture is one of the biggest and probably the most difficult things that you can do, or that is part of your growth, your experience in the DevOps space. And what I would like to do today is kind of give you a framework that you can use to build a solid foundation that can help you grow very rapidly as you kind of expand out into what DevOps means to you, to your company, to your customers, etc. So I am a software engineer with Chef, and I started out as a consultant. So what that means is they flew me to places and told me to do things at the customer sites. And when I was at that customer site, specifically for Chef, I was helping them automate their infrastructure with Chef. And that really helped me understand the importance of culture. Because the single greatest blocker to any automation implementation that I was part of was the culture of the company. If you do not have a good culture, you will not succeed in automation. And if you can't succeed in automation, then when you try to do DevOps, you're going to have a bad time. So I'm also one of the organizers for DevOps Minneapolis and DevOps Days Minneapolis. We are a community of DevOps practitioners here in the Twin Cities, and I will get to more about that later. But I'm going to start out this talk with the obligatory marketing definition slide. And that is, DevOps is the clipped compound of development and operations that practitioners of DevOps use to describe the implementation of a set of principles that promote an alternative to traditional ideology and culture. This is a long definition, but I tried to highlight a few of the key words in there. I came up with this definition, and Bridget will remember this. When we were going around trying to build up excitement for the first DevOps Days Minneapolis, we went to mini demo, and we had a panel, and people were asking us about DevOps. And I remember someone asked, if you could describe DevOps in one word, what would it be? And I think at the time I said empathy, and then proceeded to talk for like another minute and a half. So obviously it can't be done in one word, and the length of this definition reflects that. But I tried to think about how short can I make it? And I came up with this. DevOps starts and ends with people. Whatever you have in the middle, whatever GUI Oreo center you want, it starts and ends with people. So what do I mean by this? You are the people in this case. It's you, your peers, the people who are working with you every single day. And you all work together to make products. Your products are what define your company. Products build companies. And your companies build your customer base. Starts and ends with people. It starts with you and ends with your customers. The products and the companies are simply a vehicle for you to transfer your workflow, your ideas, your insights to your customers. The same way you want to help your peers, you want to help your customers. And the products and the companies you build are simply the way that you do that. So I talked about a set of principles in the definition. And one of the principles that was, this term was coined by John Willis at I think it was the first DevOps Days in the US. I think it was back in 2010. And that's CAMS. And I think CAMS is probably universally agreed to be the most concise definition of the fundamentals of DevOps. And CAMS stands for culture, automation, measurement, and sharing. So culture, I said, was the foundation. You have to have a strong culture in order to do DevOps. But you can't directly change your culture. You can change behavior, and the behavior becomes culture. I see a lot of times, in my experiences out traveling with Chef, there were a lot of cultural initiatives where we were going to change our culture and we are going to do the DevOps. But it was this superficial commandment, thrust upon the little peons that I was working with of like, thou shalt automate with Chef, or thou shalt do the continuous delivery. And it was these constraints that they had to work in, but they didn't really understand why, so they were fighting against it. But if you approach it from the behavior, when you start changing the behavior of the people that you're working with, that you're working under or over, that's when the culture grows from that. So when you're trying to build or trying to define a direction that you want to try to take your culture in, don't think about the tools or the different tricks that you want to do or the different buzzwords. Bring it back to people. So this is a quote from Adam Jacob, who's the CTO of Chef, and he gave this at this year's ChefConf keynote, and that is, you will design for the safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom of both your peers and your customers. That is the foundation that you should use to drive your behavior. And the culture will come from that behavior. Peers and customers starts and ends with people. Once you have your culture, that's when you can start to automate. The automation will only mature once you understand what your culture is. If you try to start with automation and then retro develop your culture, you're gonna end up spinning your wheels, because you're gonna find that maybe this particular automation won't work with your culture, or there's too much friction with the existing culture for the tool and nothing takes off, even though it might be a great tool. So your automation should complement your culture. It should be an extension of your culture, and the tools that you select should be a reflection of that. So it's very important that you have at least some idea of what of the principles of your culture, of what behaviors you want to exemplify, what behaviors you want to present to your customers. If you can't, the M in CAMS is measurement. If you can't measure, you can't improve. As the cycle of culture and automation, as you start growing, as you build your culture and you find automation and you kind of circle around that, you need to find a way to figure out, is this actually helping? Are we actually doing anything other than just checking off boxes in some like global to-do list, like installed Chef, done, time to go home? Like, you actually need to figure out, is this stuff helping? Because if you have ideas, so the measurements can help you validate or invalidate assumptions. If you make an assumption that Chef is the right tool for you, and you implement it, and then you measure it, and you're like, you know what? It's not. You can use those measurements. You can use that data you've collected to validate that finding. But if you just use like, it doesn't feel right, who's won an argument with that? Right, like you're never going to affect change that way. So find a way to measure. So things like that might be, how many manual tasks are we performing for a deployment? For each deployment, how many of the tasks that we do are manual? Measure that number, and then as you start to automate, track that. And you can see the number of tasks that we're manually doing go down, and the time it takes for us to do a deployment go down as well. you've learned more and you're able to see in hard numbers the benefits of these cultural changes that you're implementing. Or some like, what percentage of your code has test coverage? What percentage of your code is traveling through continuous integration or continuous delivery? These are all metrics that you can gather just to have them, just so you can start figuring out, is our balance, is our culture right? Are we finding the right automation tools to balance our culture? Do we need to make changes to one of the two? This is how you grow, is this feedback loop. And I think the most important part of this, and some people say that this is actually part of culture, and I would agree, kind of circles back, is sharing. These numbers shouldn't sit in your own little private directory that no one can access. Share this information. This is information that your peers will want. And I would argue, even your customers, make it public. Talk about your test coverage and show that it's improving over time. Talk about how many your deployment timelines or all that kind of stuff. Etsy does this with their technical blog. It's not very frequent, but every once in a while they'll actually sit down and review what have we accomplished over the last year or 6 months, and they'll talk publicly about the changes that they've made and the results of those changes. And that's a feedback loop, because when you share those with people outside your company, you automatically get access to people who have similar or differing experiences than you. Maybe there's someone that was the place you're in now, someone else was there 6 months ago. And they did something, and now they are farther and better and happier than they could have ever been. And they see that post, they see that data, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to go just send them a one-line little email like, hey, if you go plug thing X into thing Y, then unicorns start appearing and type in writing your code for you. And you would have never have known that if you hadn't shared. So CAMS is the foundation. So we talked about building your culture. And so what does that mean? What does it mean to build a culture? And what does it mean to build a culture for DevOps? The first thing is you have to seek diversity. You have to seek diversity. You need to treat failure as a learning opportunity. You need to operate and experiment in small batch sizes. And you need to practice Kaizen, or continuous improvement. You also need to practice Kaikaku and know the difference between the two. And you need to work to eliminate waste in your systems. When you're thinking about CAMS and you're thinking about how you want to start building and changing your culture, go back to this list of steps and think about, what can I do to change the behaviors of those around me to affect my culture? So let's take a moment and let's actually go through these one by one. So first is you will seek diversity. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that you need to build teams that optimize for diversity in backgrounds, experiences, viewpoints, and responsibilities. Homogeneous teams will produce a result. It may not be the result that you want, and it may not be the result that your customer wants. Because remember, you're building these tools not only for yourselves, but for your customers. And if you have these different backgrounds, you have these different experiences and viewpoints, you will think your team will come to conclusions and see things in a way that you alone couldn't. And this is really important, because I'm going to tell you a story. So we recently hired someone for the chef delivery team who had, I think, approximately 6 months of coding experience. Prior to joining our team, she was an elementary school teacher. And when I was told that, hey, there's this woman who wants to apply to chef, and she's an elementary school teacher, but she did, I think, like Code Academy or like one of those training courses, and she'd actually gone to the point where she was like a TA in one of those. I can't tell you how excited I was, because chef delivery is a product that people will use, and it will be a product that people of different technical skills and experiences and backgrounds will use. And what better person to have on the team than someone who is trained to explain things to small children? And if we have someone on that team helping us, like, hey, this documentation that you wrote, it's really kind of confusing. And, yeah, it's nice that you can type this really big long command into your terminal to do this thing, but I'm never going to remember that. It exposes things that you otherwise couldn't. You've kind of risen above that, and you can't see it anymore. You've kind of lost the trees. And so what you want to try to do is you want to try to surround yourself with people who challenge your views. If your entire team agrees on something, I would argue that you should have two responses. First is awesome, and second is, why wasn't there at least one minor dissenting opinion? It's okay to disagree on an approach. I would encourage it, because you don't fall into this sense of, lackadaisically just going to throw at all of these things. Like you actually start challenging, you start thinking like, is that really the best way to do it? And even if because I've been in that I've been in that position where I had an idea. I thought it was the best idea in the world. I couldn't imagine why anyone else would want to do differently. But I think I was the only person in like a team of 7 that thought that was a good idea. And at the time, they're like, that's a good idea, Tom, but we're not going to do it right now. But 2 months later, we actually did that thing, because I went back and I kind of measured the behavior that I was trying to correct. I was trying to correct for the amount of time that it took us to spin up our local development environments. It was taking like an hour, and it was super unreliable. So I started like actually measuring that and kind of putting it in people's heads like, yeah, wasn't that a long spin-up time? Wouldn't you want that to be faster so that you could spend more time playing Angry Birds or something? And eventually it came to the point where enough people were like, yeah, let's do that. So having dissent in your culture, I think, is important. Now, diversity can be built in 2 ways. You can hire it, or you can build it. I think hiring is definitely the fastest. You hire people with different of these things that look different than you, they think differently than you, they have lived different lives. The other way is to challenge yourself. That's, do something that you're not comfortable with. If you don't believe that a certain tool choice is the right tool choice, challenge yourself to try it and figure it out. Just see if you can figure out exactly. Maybe there's something that you're missing, but never be too stubborn in your points of view to never back down. Always be open for change. So when you're always open for change and you've kind of given this fact that like, hey, I'm not always right. The next step is the next thing you can do is kind of think about, okay, well, I'm wrong. What can I learn from that? What can you do to start treating failure as a learning opportunity? Because you can never prove anything without risking failure. If you try to completely prevent failure, you will move nowhere. Because the only way to never fail is to never move. So you have to change what failure means to you, to your culture, to you as an organization, to your peers, and to your customers. And the way you do this is you take a step back and you go to what we were talking about before about designing for safety. You design your systems, your processes, your applications, that failure is not as all-consuming as it once was. you need to accept that you will always learn more from failure than you will from success. It's just a fact. And I actually want to try that. So is there a volunteer who's willing to come up on stage with me and play a little game? Anyone? All right, come on up stage. So I have to ask before. Have you read The Black Swan?
No.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna give this to you so people can hear you. So we're gonna play a little game. I have a rule in my head, and that rule governs a list of numbers. So I will give you a list of numbers that fits my rule. You should give me a list of numbers that you think fits my rule. And I will tell you whether or not that list of numbers fits my rule. And then you will try to guess my rule. All right? So the numbers are 2, 4, and 8.
16, 32, 64.
Fits my rule. What's my rule?
Powers of 2.
No. Try again.
With another list.
Another set of 3 numbers. The rule hasn't changed.
18, 20, 22.
Fits my rule.
Even numbers.
Not my rule. Try again.
3, 4, 5.
Fits my rule.
All numbers.
Not my rule. Want to give it one more try?
$11, 12, 13.
Fits my rule.
I've got nothing.
You got nothing? So my rule, thank you very much. Give him a hand. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what my rule was?
Every number but 6.
No.
Any combination of 3 numbers.
All positive numbers, no. Any combination of 3 numbers, no.
Numbers getting some numbers. Next one's higher.
Numbers in ascending order. So what a lot of people will do here is they will come up with a rule in their head. And I applaud you because you didn't do this. You didn't fall into the trap. You didn't try numbers in non-descending order, but you didn't do what people normally do, which is like get this rule in their head and then never change. Like, no, what I think the rule is, it's right. And you don't. You learn more from failure. You learn by trying something that you think might not be right, but you think might be the right answer. Because if you have an idea about what the right answer is, and you never diverge from that, then you may never find out what the right answer is. You may just continue to try the same thoughts, and you'll never actually find the truth. So you have to change what failure means to you. Failure has to be something, it has to become a status quo event. It has to be something that you, like, when someone says to you, I failed, you have to change culturally what that means. So small batch sizes, working in small batch sizes. When you build things in small iterative changes, what you do is you're able to gather information quickly, shorten the feedback loop, and minimize the impact of failure, right? Because when you make a small change and you fail, the surface area of that failure is probably a lot smaller. And you can control for that. You can do things like, I'm going to make a small change, but it's only going to be for this like 1% of the user base. And you try and experiment. Because when you change what failure means and you work in small batch sizes, you reduce the friction for experimentation. You can try something. You can think, hey, this might be something that we haven't thought of before, but you know what, let's give it a try. And you can learn. And it takes a sprint a week, 2 weeks to just try a small little thing, an MVP, a first draft. And you just try it, and you give it to, and you kind of just do it for a short period of time, but you get your information back very, very quickly. You don't spend months or weeks or weeks or months or years developing something that may not be the right thing. So let's go back to that number game here and think about what would have happened if the game wasn't just guess my rule. The game was guess my rule and give me a list of 100 numbers that match my rule. So you need to win the game, you need to give me 100 numbers that fit my rule. Now, you can iterate and give me a list of 100 numbers, and I can tell you whether or not that 100 numbers fits my rule. But the rules of the game are you can give me any number of numbers, and I will tell you whether they fit my rule, but you don't win until you give me 100 numbers. So you can start out and give me 3 numbers. I will tell you whether or not that fits my rule. Then 4 numbers, and then 5, and then 6, and then 7. And you build, and you get feedback without putting in this huge time and effort of giving me this big, long string of 100 numbers, and basically just getting a yes or no answer. So as you make these small iterative changes, you learn as you go, and you're able to change direction and respond accordingly to the changes around you. I promised myself I was going to do it, but it's such a good... OK, so I'm a huge space nerd. I'm sorry, I'm going to nerd out here for a moment. Who here has read The Martian, the book by Andy Weir? Not enough of you. Go read it. It's such a good book. Anyways, in this book, they have a spaceship. And this spaceship has a certain type of engine. And it's called an ion drive. And the great thing about this is the ion drive is not science fiction. We have sent probes into space with ion drives. And how ion drives differ is that they send a small amount of mass, like it's just a small amount of mass, really fast out the back, out of the engine. So you get a small amount of acceleration, but because it's so little mass, you can just keep doing that. You can keep throwing small amounts of mass out the back, and you start off with like your acceleration is your acceleration is like, let's say 1 meter per second squared, like 1 meter per second per second. So at first you're going 1 meter, and then 2, and then it's an exponential growth. And that differs from how we traditionally fire humans into space with the big chemical rockets, like the big Apollo 13 rockets, where it's like a 30-story tower filled with gasoline, and we strap humans to the top of it, and then we just shoot them into space and hope that they end up where we want them to go. So everyone was familiar with the Pluto probe that we sent, right? The amount of math and calculation that it took to calculate where the Earth was going to be when we launched, where Pluto was going to be when we thought it was going to get there, and then trying to navigate around planets required a fair amount of effort, and it took a really long time. So if your goal is I want to get to Pluto, you need to spend all of this time calculating that it's going to the right place, and you need to deal with like gravity, and you need to consider all of these things. But with an ion drive, you put it into space, and you're like, OK, Pluto, go. And you start chugging along to Pluto, and you go a little bit faster over time. And when something unexpected happens, let's say a big asteroid, when you're in the ion drive ship, you just move out of the way. When you are on a ship that was sent 1 billion miles an hour in one direction, you get blown up. Or that's one thing. Or maybe we change our mind and Pluto is downgraded to basically just a boring rock again. And so now you sent this $1 billion device to Pluto to survey what's effectively a really nice big rock. And you don't want to learn anything from it anymore. But if you're in the ion drive ship, you just change course. Like, all right, cool, I'm going to go to Saturn and check out Saturn. So these small incremental changes, when you move and you kind of just build as you go, what it allows you to do is that you build up speed, and you can respond and change direction very, very easily. Thank you for sitting there and letting me just like nerd snipe you all. So Kaizen. Kaizen it's a Japanese term for basically self improvement. And the notion is here, you should never stop improving. You should always aim to improve upon something. Never be satisfied with the status quo. And what you want to do is you take advantage of the quick feedback cycles that are generated by your small batch sizes, along with the lessons learned from your failures, and you're able to always change something because hopefully you're measuring it. Remember the M from CAMS. So you're measuring you're measuring everything you do. You're operating in small batch cycles. You've changed what failure means to you. And so what now is there's always something to improve on. There's always a metric you can move. There's always a customer need that can be met. There's always something that you can do, so you're never stationary. And the things that you have to do are continuously changing because you're continuously moving. You're able to respond much, much faster. But let's say, it's early on and you don't really have all of your metrics yet. When in doubt, when you're trying to think about, if there's one thing I want you all to think about when you go home tonight is, what is it that I could be working to continuously improve on? Like, what is a small little thing that I can improve upon? And you can, if you don't know, go back to this. You want it designed for the safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom of your peers and your customers. So start thinking of an experiment that you can do that addresses one of these things. Maybe you want to start a weekly or maybe a bi-weekly DevOps Against Humanity's game event. So every 2 weeks, you say, hey, let's all get together and let's play an hour of DevOps Against Humanities. You're trying to improve upon the contentment. You're building some happiness. You're building some team camaraderie. And the great thing is that if you have this cultural initiative company-wide and you go to your boss and you're like, I want to schedule a team event. Your boss is like, why? Because I think it would benefit the team, the team's camaraderie, and it'll help improve the overall culture. If for an hour on Fridays we get to have a little fun. Hopefully your boss says yes, because I think that's a great idea. So, Kaikaku. Kaikaku is disruptive change. If Kaizen is evolution, Kaikaku is revolution. There's going to be times when you need to make decisions that will drastically alter the way in which you work. You're going to have to just take a hard left turn. And you need to be okay with making those decisions, because you've used the first three, the diversity, the learning, and the batch sizes, to know that you're going to be okay when you come out of this turn. You have enough people with enough diverse experiences and viewpoints and thoughts that you have a broader idea of what could happen when you come out of the turn. Maybe someone has even made that turn before. And you know that if you work in small batch sizes, you can start making these turns, incrementally. It's going to be scary, but it just takes practice. And drastic does not necessitate a big bang. It doesn't preclude the ability to make these drastic changes in small batch sizes and learn. Because drastic changes are the ones that probably have the highest probability of some impacts if you fail. So if you start making this turn and you're making it in small batch sizes and you're making it incrementally, and you realize, oh man, we got to abort this turn. Because you've made it in small batch sizes, because you know how to respond to failure, and because you're measuring everything, you know when to abort that turn. You know, okay, that was the wrong decision, let's go. Rather than 2 months down the line, everyone's unhappy, and you have to do this huge rollback process. Eliminating waste. ask yourself, what are the things that I don't need to be doing? Does this action that I'm doing, does this task that I'm doing add value to the product? Is it paying its rent? Is it worth the effort that I'm putting into it? This happened to us at Chef yesterday on my team. There were some integration tests that had been failing for a very long time, and we've just been kind of dealing with them. But the problem was that these failing tests started hiding other failures. So we could invest a lot of time and energy into trying to fix these tests, but we looked at it and they're like, these tests just, I mean, yeah, they're tests, but they're not adding any real value. I think one of them was pinging an endpoint and seeing whether it returned a 201 or a 404. Like, that's not a really useful test, so we just deleted them, and we were okay with that. If there are things slowing you down, eliminate them. And once again, use the core fundamentals here. Remove them incrementally. Measure them. Make sure that removing them is right. And if you were wrong, learn. So an example of something is, are there any manual processes that could be eliminated? Is there something that you're doing, like are you manually ringing a bell every time you file a bug? Is that something that can be eliminated? Or is it something that you can automate? Can you build a robot that watches Jira and basically has a little arm that just goes ding every time a bug is filed? So if you think something is wasteful, try an experiment and just remove it. If you're using source control and you're like removing a test, it's probably really easy to put that test back. And if you were wrong, share what you learned. Share that knowledge with your peers and with the larger world. Because I can almost guarantee you there are people having the same questions as you. You are so not alone in what you are trying to do. There are so many people from so many different companies trying to undergo the same transformations you are, that it's building diversity. You can get these different viewpoints. Like, how cool would it be to get a diverse viewpoint of how Disney does their DevOps? Those are experiences and backgrounds and problems that you're never going to have to deal with, but they have lessons learned, and you can benefit from those. The same way that there are others out there in the world who can benefit from the lessons that you are learning. If I could encourage you to do one thing, I was going to say print this slide out, but then I realized I made it black, and that would be a lot of ink. Retype this in maybe a white background, and print it out, and just and think about, are you working towards these things? As you grow in your DevOps travels, these are the things that you want to do. These are the things that I do. These are the things that I try to do every day. And these are the things that most DevOps practitioners try to do every day, whether or not they describe them in these words. And that's why when you ask, you can ask 100 people and get 200 different definitions of DevOps. But when you actually look at what people are doing, it's this. So I'm going to leave you today with some resources. So the first, if you like books, here are a list of books that I think you should read. The Phoenix Project is one of those quintessential, like, you're new to DevOps, here, read this book. I think everyone's response to it is, how did these authors break into my company? And how do they know that we do these things? It's a really good primer to figuring out how you want to think about this. The Lean Startup is a helpful book, because I think that even if you aren't building your own company, it's a great way to think about how to approach building a team or a product. When you start thinking of a product as its own business, and you start approaching it with some of those same concerns and those same thoughts, it can actually really enlighten you. It's really enlightening to start thinking about that. The Lean Enterprise is a great book. Jez Humble wrote it. Jez is a great dude. I haven't finished it yet. But this book has been recommended to me so many times that I think that it's one of those that you should read. Continuous Delivery, another one of those books. It's less DevOpsy and more like application development mentality. How do you develop an application such that at any point you could ship a new build to your customers? How do you actually get to that point where you feel confident and comfortable doing that? Because it's not just like, oh, we're going to open up the floodgates and just let all of our code out to the customers and let them sort through the cruft. Like there's rigor and there's culture around it. And as you read through it, you'll actually look back and see like they don't specifically mention it in these words, but like small batch sizes, learning from failure, all of those different ideas kind of exist within that book.
Question?
Yes.
Could you possibly leave your deck behind after you leave today?
Oh yes. I've actually given the deck to Scott.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so there's a website that I have. It's myname.com, and I will probably post the slides there. But yeah, I'm definitely going to make I created these slides for you. I didn't create them for me. If you want to check out some talks, there are a few really good ones that I like. Adam Jacob gave his keynote at ChefConf this year, and he talked about DevOps Kung Fu. And I really loved it. Like I was so tempted to just give up here and like put on like a beard and just pretend to be Adam and give that talk. But I didn't, because I think that you should watch it given by him, because I think he could do it way more justice than I could. But he goes into much, I kind of stopped at the principles. He goes a little bit further and talks about like, okay, you've developed these principles, now what? So if you're interested in that, I would go check that out. DevOps Culture and Practices to Create Flow by Jez. Again, another fantastic talk. I need to stop hitting that. Why We Need DevOps by Gene Kim is one of those talks that I think you look at it and you're like, oh man, it's just a dude talking on a stage. But the content in there is actually really, really cool if you can actually get below it. And then Conway's Law, the skeleton of DevOps. Who here is familiar with Conway's Law? So for those of you who aren't, Conway's Law, and I'm going to basically just kind of summarize this, is it's the applications and designs that you create, the way that your products communicate internally, how they're built, reflects the way your teams, the teams of people and the companies who built them communicate. So the products that you build are a reflection of yourself. Is the really hoity-toity way I might say that. But Dan, who's local to Minneapolis, and he actually comes to the meetups, so you can come and ask him questions about it. He gave this really great talk at the first DevOps Days Minneapolis, and that's one of those that I think you should check out. If you are interested in podcasts, it took me 20 minutes to get here, so I'm assuming some of you probably have a drive. You can listen to it in the car. Arrested DevOps has Matt Stratton, Trevor Hess, and our own Bridget Krumhout. I mean, I personally don't listen to it, but I mean, you could. No, it's actually a really good podcast. DevOps Cafe is one that John Willis and Damon Edwards do. If you want to think of like the unofficial kind of spiritual gurus of DevOps, you could probably, that's kind of what John and Damon are. Would you agree?
They're definitely up there.
Yeah, I mean, they're not the Godfather, but Patrick Dubois is the Godfather of DevOps. The Goat Farm is with Michael Ducey, who's from Chef, and Ross Clanton, who's actually from Target. It's a DevOps podcast, but they approach it from the enterprise point of view. So they talk a lot about, I call them donkey problems. So there's this, who's familiar with like the unicorns, like the tech unicorns, like Netflix and Facebook, and these people who have these magical abilities, and they like do all of this magical stuff, and you're like, man, I want to do that, but you're just like a donkey. Like you just do your job, you don't have a cool horn, and you're just kind of trudging through. That's kind of the point of view of, that's the point of view that the Goat Farm kind of comes from. The SHIP show is another one. It's a little bit more tool-based. They talk a little bit about reviews of tools and different methodologies, and it's a little less culturally more so than some of the other ones. So locally, the DevOps Minneapolis meetup that Bridget and I run with the help of some other people meets the first Monday of every month, pretty regularly. You can join our meetup group. We would love to have all of you come, because I was talking about diversity. You need to build diversity, and this is a great way to do that. You can start polluting your brain with the ideas of these outsiders in the rest of the world. And DevOps Days Minneapolis, you folks are special. You are the first ones to know outside of the core committee, or the core organizing committee, the dates. So next year, July 20 and 21st, at the Hilton again, probably. We will have DevOps Days Minneapolis. Who went to DevOps Days Minneapolis this year? All right. Did you enjoy it? Would you recommend?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
And if you didn't like listening to me talk, don't worry. I don't give talks at this one, so don't worry about that. That is all I had. So thank you. Do we have time for some questions? Sure. Cool. So at this point, I would love to answer any questions that you have. Okay. Yes. Yep. Behind you.
What do you think the first step is? If you're gonna get started, if you want to get a culture started around DevOps, first thing that the company has to do.
Yep. So the question was, what would the first step to affecting change be when trying to adopt DevOps? And that's a tough one, because I think that it's probably a juggle of a couple different things. I think the first one is, I guess the advice that I would have is the difference between the culture and the behavior. That aim to change behavior before you aim, like when you're trying to sell it to somebody. Don't say like, we need to change our culture, because that has different connotations than we need to change our behavior. So pick one of those, take one of those pieces, like one of the main slides here. I'm gonna try to pick one of these. All of these have behaviors associated with them. Small batch sizes is maybe one. So that could be a fundamental change on how you scope work. So when you're thinking, let's say you're using a tool like, let's say you're using Agile and you have a user story. Make that user story smaller. Find a way to slice that work a little bit more. Take that maybe larger concept and think, is there a way I could slice this a little bit more to make it a little bit smaller and yet still provide value? And you can measure that with story sizing. So you have a way to measure it, and all you've done is change behavior. And what you do is you kind of subvert the culture change. That you start changing these little behaviors one by one, and then all of a sudden your culture has changed. Rather than saying, we need to make this and do this and all that kind of stuff. So I would say pick one of these things. Pick a behavior that you think the people that you want to help change their behavior, and think of something that you could do in 1 week or 2 weeks. A small little experiment that you could just try and learn from that experiment. So it could be story sizing. It could be the culture of team meetings. It could be think about what behavior you could change that fits that, designing for the contentment and the safety and the knowledge and freedom of your peers, and just kind of take those pieces and figure out what's something that you could try. And if you fail, learn from that and try something else. But don't immediately give up on the thing that you tried. Maybe come back to it. Is that a sufficient answer? Okay. Any others? Okay. I'll probably be hanging around here a little bit more, so if you want to approach me, one-on-one or in person, I would love to talk to you. I'm sure Bridget also has sufficient DevOps sparkliness to give you as well. So yes, so the slides, I will make sure that these slides are somehow available to you, even if I have to paint them on the side of the building. But thank you, everyone. I really hope that you have a good day today. Try to figure out some good takeaways, and thank you.